Good day, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us again today for this session, which is a workshop on ERAS application process that will be done by the wonderful Dr. Hayward. Who has taught anthropology for almost 30 years and conducted extensive ethnographic research in the former Transkei region of the Eastern Cape, especially among Amambondo communities along the northeast coast. She joined the Rhodes University Anthropology Department in 2016 and became a reviewer on the Human Research Ethics Committee in August 2019. Her anthropological training and ethnographic research experience provided a firm foundation on which to build an understanding of ethical research practice, and she became deputy chair of the committee in April 2020. In July 2022, Dr. Hayward took over as chair of the committee and took on the role of ethics coordination. So today's conversation will focus on the ethical application, which is a process of applying for ethics at any other university, but mainly Dr. Hayward will be speaking to us about the application process at Rhodes University and what the committee looks for in that application. But just before handing over to you, Doc, I just wanted to highlight some few housekeeping. So I will be looking at the chats just to see if there's any questions that are posed to the Center for Postgraduate Studies, but also Dr. Hayward will also be looking at the chats after a presentation to engage with the students or even during a presentation. Mainly, I will also be posting an evaluation link in the chats now and again for you to please assist us to evaluate this workshop and any other workshops that we have done so that we can best position our research engagements at the center together with your suggestions that will be done in the evaluation. The evaluation is totally anonymous. And thank you once again and welcome to everyone who's here. Doc, thank you very much for making the time. Over to you.
For that introduction and also for this invitation, which I really appreciate. I'm just going to share my screen to pull up the PowerPoint. I'm going to just start by telling you what I hope to cover in this short hour. The first thing I want to do is just outline the 4 different ethics committees on the campus. We're going to talk a little bit about risk assessment because when it comes to research with human participants, the committee that you apply to depends on the risk level of your study. So we'll talk a little bit about what the different risks involve. We're then going to briefly consider other ethical considerations. And both of these, of course, are also going to give you some insight into how to fill the form in, what we're looking for in filling in your applications. I'm then going to go into the form itself, just to show you how to access it, and again, give you some pointers in terms of how to complete it. Next, I'm going to very briefly talk about the post-submission process, what happens after you've submitted your application, and roughly how long the process will take. And then finally, we'll give you some space to ask your questions and for me to answer them. If you do want to stop me along the way, though, please do, or put it in the chat and we will deal with it later on. So, you're either going to be doing research with human participants or with animal subjects, except for those of you who are going to be doing literature reviews or some form of research that does not involve either human or animal subjects or participants. All animal research applications need to be submitted to the Animal Research Ethics Committee. We'll go into how to access that form in a while. This would include all research with animals, whether vertebrates or invertebrates. Human participants, research with human participants, almost all faculties who are involved in research with human participants will submit their applications to the Human Research Ethics Committee. And again, we will go into how that form can be accessed. However, you must bear in mind that if you are in the education faculty or in the humanities faculty, there are two subcommittees that deal with low-risk applications. So that is why we're going to start off talking about how to determine what kind of risk level your research falls under, so that you can be sure that you submit your application to the correct committee. One of the greatest time wasters is when applications are submitted to the incorrect committee, because then you have to fill out a new application, it has to go to a different committee, and it can waste a lot of time. Again, I'm going to, at the end, give you contact details of the chairs of all the different committees. And I really urge you that if you're having any difficulty deciding what level of risk your research constitutes, or any other questions regarding filling in the application form, make contact with the chair or with me, and we will help you work that out to try and fast track your applications as far as possible. So if we move on to the assessment of risk, risk refers to the potential. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it requires us to think through what potential risks could this research result in. And these risks could be risks, obviously, with the participants themselves, but also the researcher, you as a researcher, or any research assistants that may be helping you. If there's any risk to them, you need to think about that. You also need to think about institutional, damage to reputational harm to an institution. So if you want to work with employees about perhaps their HR processes or something that might ultimately cause reputational harm to the institution, that also constitutes a risk. According to the Rhodes policy, we recognize 4 risk categories, but the first one is research that does not have contact with human participants. And in this case, you do not need to apply for ethics clearance. If you're not interacting with humans, you don't need ethics clearance, you can just go right ahead. So that would be things like data that's previously been collected and that data received ethics clearance, you can use it again. If you're using an existing data set that is anonymized, you can use that. If you're analyzing documents, if you're reviewing literature, if you are using human cell lines that you have acquired from a commercial source that you're not actually taking from humans yourself, again, that doesn't require ethical clearance. And basically texts that are available freely in the public domain. In other words, research, if you're not interacting with human participants, you don't need ethical clearance. Sometimes this kind of research, you want to publish it in a journal article, and sometimes journals want you to submit proof of ethics clearance. In this case, you would simply write me an email and ask for what is called an ethics waiver letter. And I will give you a letter saying that because your research has not involved interaction with human participants, you have been granted ethics waiver. In other words, you don't need ethical approval to do that particular study. All other studies that involve, just to say here, I'm going to be speaking primarily about human participants here. The animal ethics, if you have any queries, you can address those to Professor Tandlich, but that process is kind of less complex than the human participants. So I am going to be spending most of this workshop focusing on research with human participants. But if you are an animal researcher, stick around, because the part when I tell you about how to access the forms will also be useful to you. The second category, category 2, is low risk. And the definition of this is that the risk of harm to your participants or to your researchers must be no greater than those imposed by daily life. So This would include, for example, if you want to do research in the classroom, especially if you're wanting to research teachers, teaching methods. The participants, the children in that classroom are just having a routine day at school, albeit that there is perhaps a researcher in the room. But there's nothing that you're doing that's going to be different from their normal daily activities. That would constitute a low-risk study. Other examples, market research. If you're just interested in non-sensitive questions about people's lives or opinions. If you want to review documentation that may not be available in the public domain, but doesn't include sensitive or privileged information. As I said, usual classroom or educational activities, or usual sort of ordinary kind of, doesn't involve anything unusual, anything that's going to put either the participants or the researchers in give them potential to experience harm that is greater than they would normally experience in their lives. Next category, category 3, which is medium risk. This means there is some risk to participants, researchers, and/or institutions. This risk is greater than that would be imposed by daily life, but you can take steps to reduce or mitigate that risk. And a lot of the form is going to be asking you to think about what the risks might be and explain how you're going to mitigate them. So some examples here would be research that may have the potential to evoke negative feelings. So you may be asking questions that make people feel embarrassed or depressed or anxious. In that case, it doesn't mean that your research is not viable. It certainly is, but you need to think about what are the negative emotions that my research may arouse in my participants, and what can I do to mitigate that? So you could, for example, give your participants the contact number for a helpline. Or if your participants are Rhodes students, you could give them contact details for the counseling center. So you're acknowledging that they may experience negative feelings, but you're also giving them a way to deal with that. Research that involves groups of vulnerabilities. Now, vulnerabilities would include things like disabilities, poverty. Often sex workers are considered vulnerable, prisoners, people whose lives are more compromised than the majority of people. That would be a medium risk study. And then, of course, if you're doing research in a locality that may contain potential risks. So, for example, Polobeni in the Transkei, where there's a lot of conflict in the community about the mining. Some community members want the mining, others don't. There are various activist groups involved. So it's a politically unstable situation. That would constitute a medium risk study as well. High risk, there needs to be significant and likely risk of harm to the researcher, participants, or institutions, and that this harm has a potential to lead to serious adverse consequences. Again, just because your research is high risk, that does not disqualify your study for ethics approval. It just requires you to think through the risks very, very carefully, and of course, to think about how you're going to mitigate them. So here we've got research on highly sensitive topics. For example, experiences of violence or rape or illegal activities. If your research participants have significant vulnerabilities or multiple vulnerabilities, so if they're poor and disabled, for example, you have to think it through a lot more clearly. Research conducted in a locality that definitely contains risks to participants and researchers. If you're going to deceive your participants, if you're going to tell them you're doing one thing, but actually you're doing another, this is occasionally acceptable in research as long as you have a very, very good reason for doing it. Research involving illegal activities. research activities where the participants may place themselves at risk at harm if they participate. So in a divided community, if you want to work amongst one group of participants, which may cause them to then be the targets of another group in the community, that would be high risk. And of course, anything that causes the researcher to risk breaking the law. So to be honest, the vast majority of studies tend to be medium risk. Okay. Yes, let's move on. As I say, I'm going to give you contact details at the end, and really to fast track the progress of your application, I really urge you, if you're feeling uncertain about what level of risk your study is, rather reach out either to myself or one of the other chairs, chat to them about it, and they will help you make the right decision. When it comes to other ethical considerations, I want to point you now, let's just go into Chrome. At this point, I'm just going to show you how to access the ethics web page. So you go to the Rhodes website. Can't work out where everything's gone now. Okay, somewhere on that page, there is a tab that takes you to the research page. And once you're on the research page, you can click you'll click ethics and it'll take you here. I'm not sure why. Usually you can get the access tabs along here to select things, and you would select the research tab, and then on the research you would have another series of tabs, and you would select ethics, and that will bring you to this page here. So when it comes to considering other research ethics considerations, my best advice to you is to come down here where it says policies and resources, all right? And underneath resources, there is this document, which is called Participant Informed Consent. So you download that document, which I've already downloaded. Here it is. And that is a template for an informed consent declaration, which has to be signed by your research participants. You can go through this verbally in certain cases. For example, if your participants are illiterate, but in that case, you would need to record the verbal consent. And for the most part, it can be done in writing. It's better to do it in writing because you need that record. If your participants are isiXhosa or Afrikaans speaking, it's a good idea to get this translated into their mother tongue so that they can understand it very clearly. But in terms of ethical considerations, if you download this form before you even start with your application and you fill this form in, because as you can see, there's lots and lots of red in here, and the red has to all be replaced with, in this case, the project title, the name of the researcher, the department. You need to fill in all of this information. You then go down here and you fill this in, and you fill in section by section. The purpose of this research project is to, and you basically give a slight abstract, a brief abstract of what your study is about. You tell the participants exactly what you expect from them. You're going to want to spend about 45 minutes with them. You're going to want to conduct an interview with them. You want them to participate in a focus group, whatever the case may be. You clearly spell out here the research activities that you're going to expect your participants to take part in. And then you will also, again, tell the participants exactly what you want from them, how much time, how many days, etc. Sorry, I beg your pardon, this one is contributing towards, okay? So you will be, the research will be contributing towards better understanding of student experiences at Rhodes during orientation week, or whatever the greater picture that the research will contribute to. Here you're telling the participants about the research methods, right? What methods are you going to use? What kinds of questions are you going to be asking? How much time is the participant going to be expected to spend on this? All of these things are covering essential ethical principles, right? So the fact that your participants must do it voluntarily. They can't be coerced into participating. And if they start participating and then change their minds and decide it's not for them, they have to be allowed to leave, and you have to then delete any data you might have collected from them. So they have to enter voluntarily, and they have to be allowed to exit at any point should they decide to do so. You're not going to pay for the research. This form is a template that could be changed. So if for some reason you are going to be compensating participants, you would say, I will be compensated, and this is the rate I'll be compensated for. Generally, we prefer not to compensate participants for participating, because that, of course, might skew your data. They may be participating for the reimbursement or for the stipend, rather than because they actually want to participate. However, if they have to catch a taxi or something to get to where you want to meet them, that's different, because that's compensation. If they have to spend their own money to get there, that's fine. If your research project takes the whole day and they're not going to, then you can provide lunch because they need to eat. That's not being paid for the data. That's just having their own expenses reimbursed. Number 7 is very important. The following risks are associated with my participation. There you would think about, I might feel embarrassed. I might feel anxious. If it's an HKE project and they're going to be expected to do perhaps run on a running machine or something, there's a risk they might fall, right? So you would lay out the risks. Risk is not something that happens. It's a potential that might happen. So we just have to think out of the box. What is the worst? What is even the minor things that could happen to my participants? We just have to think it through. We're not saying these things are going to happen. They probably aren't, but we need to consider what might happen. You need to inform your participants that you're planning on publishing the research. Mostly it's going to be in a journal article, or there may be some book that you're researching for. You would tell your participants where the research is going to be where it's going to be published. Confidentiality and anonymity is very important. So you have to assure your participants that you're not going to disclose their names. There are obviously exceptions. Sometimes we do research with famous musicians who, firstly, it might be impossible to hide who their identities. Also, they may not want you to hide their identities. They may want to be identified. In that case, this one becomes very important further down, where they agree, you make it clear that you're not going to, they have to be told, it is not possible to maintain my anonymity. Mostly you do want to keep people anonymous, but if it's not possible for them to be anonymous, then they need to know that that is the case. We have to, because of the Personal Papier Act, we can't just go in, collect data and disappear again. We have to go back and report back to our participants. So we need to tell them how they're going to get that feedback. If you're going to use the data again for another study, you might as well get permission to do so now, so that you don't have to send out another informed consent form if you want to use the data again. So if it is to be, okay, so you can amend this now, because this says if any data will be used, you can say data collected from this study will be used in the future. I'm aware that it's going to be used in the future, because that will save you from having to get that again. If you're not going to, if you know for a fact that you're not going to be using the data again, you can just leave it like that, because then if you change your mind, I guess you've got an escape. Or if you absolutely know for sure you're not going to use it again, you would just say, this data will be used for this study only. So you can, these are guidelines, but different studies are going to require these to be filled in slightly differently. Feedback, if they have any questions, they can refer them either to the research office or your supervisor or you. These two, I agree or disagree for photographs and videos and for voice recording. If you're going to, this is important that you know that if you are going to be taking photos or videos, you get their consent, because it's if you're going to retain anonymity, then you have to either take photographs that you can't identify the participants, or you have to black out their faces, or they need to know that you're not going to be doing that, and they need to be comfortable with it. Videoing is in itself a research method. So you may want to video people, not because you're ever going to publish those videos anywhere, but because you're going to use those videos as data to analyze. You can make that clear here. I am going to be videoing you. However, the video is for data collection purposes only, and it will never be punished. It will never be published. Therefore, your anonymity will never be compromised. Similarly with recording, voice recording, you know, it's very useful to record interviews because it's very time consuming and often not that accurate to be taking handwritten notes. So you need permission from your participants to use, to voice record the interviews, but you can make it perfectly clear that this is for data collection only. You're not going to be publishing or putting out in the public sphere the voice recordings where their voices may be recognized. That will remain confidential because you're only going to use it for data collection. So these issues of anonymity, confidentiality, informed consent, consenting to the research, having been fully informed of what the research is about, the fact that people mustn't be coerced to take part, the fact that they must be able to leave if they change their minds. All of the things covered in this informed consent form basically cover the important ethical considerations. And many of these, once you fill this form in, can simply be copied and pasted and sort of shuffled around a little bit in the application form itself, because many of the questions in the form are dealing specifically with these issues. So unfortunately, we don't have time to go more deeply into the ethical considerations. But my advice to you, as I said, is to start with that participant-informed consent form.
Doc, may I interject? Sorry, please. I raised my hand.
Yes.
Maybe you didn't recognize me.
Sorry,
Thank you. On the consent form, the last two sections where they give consent for recording and pictures to be taken and so forth. I'm confused about something there. My understanding of a consent form, or maybe where I come from before I came to Rhodes, was that you submit some sort of a template to the committee of how you will get consent from people. So you show the committee that, you know what, I will ask them whether I can record or I cannot record. But they don't fill it in because you don't know yet whether they are going to agree or not. But when I look at this consent form, it looks like it needs to be filled in already before I even approach the participants. So how do I know that they are going to give consent to be recorded or not? That is the one thing that I've struggled a lot with this consent form. Hence, I haven't used anything. I haven't used it at all.
So thank you for your question. All the red parts, you need to delete the red part and include the relevant information about your study. When it comes to these parts here, you see it says, I agree, stroke, disagree, delete, inapplicable. So this is only to be filled in when you are actually interacting with your participants. So if they agree to you taking photographs, you would delete the disagree, you would simply just delete that, right? So that I agree, so that when they sign, they are agreeing to photos or videos being taken. Because you're right, you can't anticipate before what the situation will be. That's why it's phrased like this. And that's why this part isn't red, because this part will actually only be filled in when you are interacting with your participants. If they agree, you delete the disagree. If they disagree, unfortunately, you delete the agree, in which case that participant will not be able to be photographed or videoed. I don't know if that helps. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it makes sense. So in a way,
so
on the before I submit the application form, I believe that I need to attach the consent form, right?
Correct.
So meaning 14 and 15 will not be, there'll be no changes there. So after I've got consent from them, do I resubmit the consent form or not? Because how will the committee know that indeed I got consent or I did not get it?
Well, I mean, the onus is on you once you've got ethics approval to go ahead and get your participants to fill out the participant informed consent. We're not here to police you. We're only here to guide you. In the future, if there is some ethical concern that comes up about your research, you will be asked to present the completed informed consent forms. But we don't go around policing every individual research project.
All right, thank you very much.
We expect road researchers to behave in a professional way, right? So we don't then come and check and police you. The only thing is that down the line, if there is a complaint or if there is a problem, we will then come back to you and say, where are your informed consent forms for this project? If you understand what I'm saying.
I understand, Doc. Thank you for clarity.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. Yeah, so I don't think we have time to go because I really want to leave some time at the end to answer your questions. So let's move then on to the online application system. And here again, you have to navigate yourselves to this research ethics page, which as you can see, here's the route from roads. You go to the research gateway and then you'll get to ethics. I'm really have no clue why my browser isn't allowing me to do that, but it's a fairly easy process to get there. You then scroll down to where it says accessing the online system. And you have two options here. You're going to either, well, in your case, you're probably all going to be applicants. Some of you might act as reviewers on one of the research ethics committees. Then as a reviewer, you would go to a different portal, you would go there. But if you're wanting to apply, this is the portal you click on. Applicants, click here to access ERAS. You have to log in. And we'll come to this work area. You log in with your normal roads login, nothing different, okay? And the first thing you need to do would then be to create a project. So you click on create project, you enter a title. And this is a very important part. You need to select the form, right? So it's a drop-down menu. If it's an animal ethics, it's very simple. You click on that one and that will take you directly to the animal ethics application form. If you are in any other faculty other than education or humanities, you don't have anything else to think about, you would then just click straight on human ethics. If you are in the education faculty or in the humanities faculty, the only thing you have to know is whether your study is a low risk or not. Because if you are in the humanities faculty and you have a low risk project, this is the form you must complete. It's a different form. And similarly, if you're on the education faculty and it's a low risk study, you click that form. If you are in education or humanities and your study is medium or high risk, you also go to the human ethics form. It's very important, and if you have any queries, please check it out with myself or any of the chairs, because this is really a stage where a lot of people lose a lot of time by filling in the wrong form. So your study is, you're in the humanities faculty, your study is actually medium risk, but you fill in the low risk study. fill in a low risk form. That means it goes to the wrong committee. The chair of the committee has to read it and find, sometimes it only happens, you know, further down the line, the chair realizes, hey, this is not a low risk study. This is a medium risk study. Then you have to start from scratch. You've got to delete that form. You've got to come in here and start all over again with the other form. So I really urge you to be sure that you complete the right form, because otherwise it's a terrible waste of time. So the form I'm going to go into is this one, because it's the most generic one. And then you just literally create your form. Form. You can see there are a number of sections. You have to fill in everything. So here it actually explains to you, right, exactly what I've been telling you, that it has, you know, except I'm not sure. Yeah, it's not, it could be in more detail. And you literally go through and fill everything in, all right? Let's say this is going to be a student research project. Then you need to say what level of research, et cetera, et cetera. You carry on. When you get to the bottom, you press next. You fill in all your details. The researcher, it's a student, so you'd have to put in the supervisor. If you have more than one supervisor, you add another and add their details. If there are any collaborators, you say yes, and then the box will come up so that you can say who the collaborators are. Okay, that's still easy. Department. Okay, abstract. Here, you might want to expand a little bit on what you've already written in your participant informed consent, but you're just really talking about the purpose and the rationale of your proposed study. So, to be honest, with all of these questions, I urge you simply to answer the question. So this isn't really asking for theoretical framework. You know, sometimes people think the easiest way to fill in an ethics form is to sort of copy and paste from your research proposal. It works in a few cases, you know, but in most cases, the ethics application is asking you to look at your research through a different lens. It's less of a theoretical, you could say, lens, and more of a consideration for your participants rather than the data that you're collecting. Not that the two are unrelated, they are related, but we're asking for the purpose and the rationale. So literally 1 or 2 paragraphs. Why are you doing the research? What is it about? Okay. And again, simply list each method of data collection, document analysis, focus groups, interviews, whatever the case may be. My best advice to you is, as I say, first of all, fill in the participant informed consent form, because a lot of that information you can transfer directly here, unlike your research proposal. But most importantly, answer the questions as simply and directly as possible. That makes it easier for the reviewers. We're not looking for 5 paragraphs about a theoretical framework. We are talking about who are your participants, what are your research questions, what are the ethical implications of the study. So you carry on, you fill in all of this. Most of these questions are fairly straightforward. This would be require involvement. That would be, for example, no, that isn't a researcher. I mean, all of you are appropriately trained to conduct research. This would be some kind of external specialist. So maybe, again, if you're an HKE and you have a study that involves monitoring people with some kind of a machine, you know, electrodes to the brain or something, and you don't have a training to do that. So that, but you require the involvement of somebody who can do that. That would be that sort of thing. This is very important. Are particular characteristics of any kind required? So do your students, for example, do your participants need to be road students? Do they need to be parents? Do they need to be employees of a certain firm or company? Do they need to be men? Do they need to be women? What are the age group? Do they need to belong to specific race groups or not? What is it about your participants that makes them your participants? What are the characteristics they need to have in order to be included in your participant group? Various other questions: road students, road staff, institutional population. Will you consult records for information? So if you are doing research amongst road students, will you be consulting their marks perhaps, or any other records? Are they over the age of 18? This doesn't mean you can't do research with children. It just means you need to think through the risks a little bit more clearly. Are you collecting information, for example, school reports, right, or medical information, any records that are located in these kind of settings? Yes or no? Will the project be conducted on private property? So will it be in a public space, or will it perhaps be in a person's home? Gatekeeper permission is required when you are collecting your research participants in a particular institution, for example. So if you want to do research with road students, you can't just sweep in and do that without permission from the registrar. If you want to do research amongst road staff, same, you have to have permission from the head of HR. If you want to do research on a game farm, right, amongst the game wardens on the game farm. If you are approaching those game wardens through their work, via their workplace, you can't just go in and find them like that. You need permission from the manager or the owner of the game farm if you are going to be accessing their workers. If you have a way of access, if you want to do your research on game wardens in general, rather than those belonging to one particular farm, and you have a way, you have access to a person who happens to be a game warden, and that person can perhaps call a meeting of other game wardens, and none of this is happening at the workplace. This is happening in private space, where you are interested in these people because they are game wardens, not because they are game wardens working on a particular game farm. In other words, you are accessing them not via their workplace, and they are being told about the research and participating in their own capacity as mature individuals. You wouldn't need gatekeeper permission, right? So it really depends on the recruitment. If you are going to be recruiting people through their workplace because they work in a specific place, you cannot just go and recruit them without permission. If you have some other way of accessing that doesn't involve getting their names and addresses from HR or meeting them at their workplace, but if you have a way of accessing them where they are participating purely on their own capacity and not because they work for a certain place, you don't need gatekeeper permission. Gatekeeper permission waiver is a situation where, even though your participants are working under the auspices of, you recruiting them because they work for a certain organization. Say you read in the newspaper that a particular restaurant doesn't pay their waitrons at all. They have to exist entirely on tips. And you'd like to find out about that. But you know for a fact that if you go to the owner of that restaurant and say, I want to do research amongst your waitrons about their payment, that they're not going to give you permission. Clearly they're not, because it's not in their interests. then you are in a position where you can ask for permission, gatekeeper permission waiver. Then you would explain in the application, you'd say, look, if you request gatekeeper waiver, explain, right? Then you would explain. You would say, this is my research question. Because of the nature of my research question, I'm unlikely to get gatekeeper permission from the owner or manager of the restaurant. Therefore, I request a waiver. So a gatekeeper permission waiver will be granted if you give a good enough reason for needing it. That doesn't mean that any work with employees requires gatekeeper permission waiver, because a lot of research with employees is asking fairly innocuous questions, which the management shouldn't have any problem with giving you permission. So so that's the gatekeeper issue. And again, you know, if you're uncertain, ask. If you're not certain, ask. Carrying on. You've got to talk a little bit more. I'm running out of time, guys. I'm not going to go through this entirely. You need to think about vulnerabilities. Once you've completed the whole form, again, you've got to say a lot, and as I've said earlier, a lot of this you will be able to literally copy and paste from the participant. You've already spoken about this feedback in the participant informed consent form, so you can more or less just reflect that back. It's very important that everything that you say in your application is backed up in the informed consent form, and vice versa. You know, sometimes people say one thing in the participant informed consent form, and they don't touch on that at all in the application form, or they talk about things in the application form and it's not reflected in the participant informed consent form. They must be completely aligned, which is why I recommend you start with the informed consent form, because you will find that will make this, a lot of this, much easier. This is the risk, very important. And as I said, it's very important that you get this right. And if you're all unsure about it, please email me and I'll help you. Before, and now you get to the end. No. Yeah, okay, here's the important part, right? Before you sign, you have to, for this to be submitted on the ERAS system, you have to sign as the student, right? And also you have to, you also have to get your supervisor to also sign. They both have to sign, and it will not progress in the system until everybody has signed. When you get to this part though, before you try and sign, click on completeness check. Now, there are a million things I haven't filled in here, right? As you can see, but you will, before you sign, I recommend you click on this, because then it will tell you everything that you haven't completed. And you can go back and complete all of that before you get to this stage. So then you would sign as a student, and you would request signature for your supervisor. And they should get an email requesting the signature. They will be able to come in and sign. Once you think that you've submitted the application form, well, once you have submitted it, you will receive a confirmation email. So if you feel that you've submitted your form, but you have not received the confirmation email, come in again and do another completeness check. And it may say under the completeness check, your supervisor hasn't signed, or there's something that you forgot to fill in, or there's some problem. If you get that confirmation email, you're good to go. Which brings me then to the section, the second last thing I want to talk about before we get to questions. What happens post-submission? So the submission will begin from the moment you get that confirmation email. There is a form on, there is a PDF available on the ethics website, well, perhaps I'll just take you in there quickly, just to show you. Again, if you come here, you go right, scroll right down to the very, very bottom under this section here where it says research involving human participants. Here is the PDF that you can download with all the 2023 meetings. Oh. Okay, I haven't got time to do this now. The point is though, the dates are all on that form, as well as the date of the date that you need to submit, because applications must be submitted 2 weeks before the meeting, because they have to be sent out for review. So if this next meeting, for example, is on the 23rd of March, so the applications need to be, I've actually said a week and a half before, because we changed the meeting date, long story. Every other month other than March, right? Your application form must be in 2 weeks before the meeting, because it needs to be sent out for review. It's sent out to 2 reviewers for review. They have a look at it, they note any of their concerns, and at that month's meeting, your application will come up for discussion. It can receive essentially, well, there are 4 possible decisions, but the 4th decision is never really made. We always rather negotiate a way through that. So the first, obviously the most desirable decision would be approved. Very, very few applications go through straight away with approval. It's sort of maybe 3 a year, because most of them do have 1 or 2 little issues that need attention. But the first possible decision is approved. The second decision, which is by far the majority of decisions, are minor modifications. You will have the decision communicated to you. We meet on Friday afternoons, and by Tuesday the following week, you will have heard what your decision is. If it's minor modifications, you simply need to go back and access the form in the same way, go into the form again. Once it's sent back to you for minor modifications or major modifications, you're then able to edit the form again. You can see the comments that are made by the reviewers, and you are able to edit or give the information they want, or change what they don't like, or do all the corrections. When you've done the corrections, you go through the same process of signing it off, getting your supervisor to sign it off, submitting it. Again, you must get that confirmation email to be certain that it has progressed in the system. If it's minor modifications, as soon as it comes back into my workspace, which it will do once you've submitted it, if it's a minor modification, I will then review that. If I'm satisfied with your changes, I will approve it. Occasionally, I need 1 or 2 more things that need to be done, in which case I'll send it back to you for additional information. Again, the minute you resubmit that, I'll look at it again and approve it. So apart from approval, minor modifications is really what you want, because as soon as you submit them, they will be reviewed, well, within, say, a maximum of a week, not always the same day, but shortly. You don't have to wait for the next meeting, is the important thing. When it comes to major modifications, we do have 1 or 2, maybe sometimes 3 major modifications a month. Those are also returned, and you get a chance to edit it and change it and see what the problems are. Again, you sign it off again, resubmit it. Unfortunately, minor modifications I can't review without the backing of the committee. So those have to go in front of the next meeting. In other words, it's a great idea to try and answer all the questions as succinctly as possible the first time, so that you can either get first prize of approval or second prize, which isn't too bad, which is minor modifications. And I will now hand over to you. Here are the contact details. I will make this PowerPoint available if see, you know, if and it can be shared with you. But in the meantime, I mean, all of these are actually available on, you know, online on the Rhodes staff directory. And as I say, I will also make, and well, this is being recorded, so I'm sure you'll have access to that, but I can also forward this PowerPoint for your reference too. So with just a little bit of time left, I'll hand over to you guys for any questions that you might have. Yes, login is student number or staff number, the same exact login that you use for your, well, to access RU Connected or to access your email. It's the same, it's your is that because you have a staff and a student number?
Yes, Dr. Hayward, that's why. I'm just wondering which one.
Yeah, it's complicated. I think it's staff is better. Sometimes we have a case where somebody applied for ethical approval when they were a student. They've now become a staff and they no longer can access it via their student number. That's not a problem. Contact me and I can help you transfer the form from one email address to another. So either works. Sometimes postdocs don't get automatically loaded onto the system. If you try and access ERAS and you can't get in, just drop me an email and I'll see what the issue is. Normally all postgraduate students and all staff are automatically enrolled as users on the system. And it just makes sense to use your staff email if you have a staff and a student. But as I say, both will work, both work. And if you struggle with anything, I can help you sort it out.
Thanks, Doc. Thank you.
Thank you. Pro, I'm not sure what you mean by the first ethics form.
Good afternoon, Dr. Sorry, I joined late, but there's a form that was written in red and with question 14 and 15 that had agree or disagree. I thought it's an ethics form.
No, that's the informed consent form that you need to submit as part of your application.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, as part of your application, you're required to upload that form. That form doesn't substitute the ethics form, but they work together. They kind of complement each other. They need to be aligned. But you still need to fill in the application form. So yeah, you do submit both in a sense, the online application form, and then you upload the participant informed consent form as part of that application.
Okay, thank you.
Claire, yes, well, it doesn't automatically save progress, but there's a tile on the left that says save. So you can go in there, fill in a few bits, go out, but before you go out, just make sure you click save. There's a little stiffy disk icon on the left-hand side that says save, and as provided you click save, it will save your progress. Thank you, James. Sure thing. I'll do that with you. I'll email that to you. Anybody else got any questions?
I just wanted to ask, you said the committee meets once a month, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Just check on the ethics web page. Right at the very, very bottom, you can download the PDF, which has all the meeting dates for 2023 and also the dates, the final date of submission prior to each meeting.
Thank you.
So, I mean, especially for supervisors, it might be a good idea to print the PDF and put it up on your notice board just so that you can keep track. But I will tell you that the meetings are almost always in the last week of the month, which means the deadline for applications is roughly halfway through the month. Well, thank you, everybody. I think I'll hand back to CPGS now. And thank you very much for attending and also for this opportunity, CPGS. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you very much to you, Doc, for this insightful presentation, sharing, the process, which can be very tedious. So thank you very much. Thank you very much to everyone that has joined. Please have a great day further.
Thank you. Goodbye.